15 most awful personalities in R&B music. What if the voices that defined a generation were breaking long before we noticed? Behind platinum records and standing ovations were battles hidden in plain sight, moments that changed everything. The truth is far deeper than the headlines. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Black Excellence List. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston did not rise quietly. She arrived with a voice that felt almost otherworldly. In the mid-1980s, she became a global force, turning songs like Saving All My Love for You and later I Will Always Love You into cultural landmarks. Her performance in The Bodyguard expanded that reach, placing her at the center of music and film at once. At her peak, she wasn't just successful, she defined excellence. That is what makes her story fit this title so powerfully. Because the higher the image rises, the more devastating the cracks appear when they begin to show. Behind the flawless notes and sold-out arenas, pressure began to build in ways the public did not fully understand at the time. Her relationship with Bobby Brown brought intense media attention, and over the years, reports of substance struggles and emotional strain surfaced, often magnified by relentless scrutiny. By the early 2000s, performances that once felt effortless began to show signs of wear, missed notes, canceled appearances, and long absences from the stage. How do you carry a legacy built on perfection when the world is watching for every flaw? That tension became part of her later career. The 2009 comeback album, I Look to You, signaled resilience, yet it also revealed the cost of years spent under pressure that few could truly comprehend. Whitney Houston's story is not defined by a single moment, but by contrast, the brilliance that captivated millions and the vulnerability that followed it. Her passing in 2012 at the age of 48 marked the end of a life that had given so much to music, while also reminding the world how fragile even the most powerful voices can be. What remains is not just memory, but impact, a catalog that continues to influence generations, and a legacy that feels both triumphant and haunting. In that balance between light and shadow, her story continues to resonate long after the final note fades. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's story begins under the glare of childhood fame long before the world called him the king of pop. As the youngest standout voice of the Jackson 5, he sang with a maturity that made America stop and listen. By the time he became a solo superstar, his image had grown almost mythic. The white glove, the fedora, the sharp jacket, the moonwalk, and the electric silence before a crowd erupted. Albums like Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad did more than sell records. They changed the shape of pop music, dance, television, and celebrity itself. Yet behind that impossible brilliance was a life marked by pressure, isolation, and public scrutiny. Jackson spent his early years working while other children were still learning how to dream. Later, his changing appearance, his private world at Neverland, and the controversies surrounding his personal life turned him into one of the most analyzed figures in entertainment history. He denied allegations of abuse, was acquitted in his 2005 criminal trial, yet the debate around his legacy never fully disappeared. Can a person give the world magic and still remain trapped inside pain the world never truly understood? His final chapter made the story even heavier. In 2009, while preparing for the This Is It comeback concerts, Jackson died suddenly at the age of 50, leaving fans stunned across generations. For American viewers who grew up hearing Billie Jean, watching Thriller on television, or seeing the moonwalk for the first time, his death felt like the closing of an era. Michael Jackson remains tied to both wonder and unease, a genius performer, a wounded public figure, and a man whose name still opens conversations about fame, childhood, race, media, judgment, and the cost of becoming unforgettable. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye did not just sing soul music, he reshaped it into something intimate, political, and deeply human. Raised in Washington, D.C. under the strict discipline of his father, he carried both musical brilliance and emotional weight into his career. At Motown Records, he began as a polished voice of romance, delivering hits like How Sweet It Is and Ain't No Mountain High Enough. But the man behind the microphone was already searching for something deeper than love songs alone. That shift came with What's Going On, an album that broke from Motown's formula and spoke directly to a nation in turmoil. Inspired by war, poverty, and social unrest, Marvin Gaye transformed his sound into layered storytelling, asking questions that echoed far beyond music charts. The success was undeniable, yet his personal life grew increasingly complicated struggles with depression, financial pressure, and substance use slowly closing in. When a voice becomes powerful enough to speak for a generation who carries the weight of that voice when the music stops, his later years felt like a slow unraveling behind the scenes. After attempting a comeback in Europe and returning to the United States, tensions within his family remained unresolved. In 1984, just one day before his 45th birthday, Marvin Gaye was fatally shot by his father during an argument, bringing a tragic and abrupt end to a life that had already carried so much conflict beneath its surface. For those who lived through his era, Marvin Gaye remains unforgettable not only for his sound, but for the honesty he poured into it. His music still lingers in quiet rooms, on late-night radio, and in conversations about art that dares to confront reality. He stands as both a symbol of creative courage and a reminder of how fragile even the most extraordinary voices can be when the world behind them begins to fracture. R. Kelly. R. Kelly's story carries a darkness that cannot be separated from the music anymore. For years, he was celebrated as one of R&B's most successful voices, the man behind songs that filled weddings, radio stations, and arenas. His catalog sold millions, and his influence shaped an entire era of slow jams and modern soul. But behind that fame, disturbing allegations followed him for decades, creating a shadow that grew larger than the stage itself. What once looked like unstoppable success slowly became one of the most public collapses in music history. The warning signs were not hidden forever. Reports and accusations involving young women surfaced again and again while his career continued to move forward. For many fans, the hardest question became not just what he had done, but why the industry allowed the machine around him to keep running. The 2019 documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly, brought renewed national attention to survivors' accounts and forced a wider reckoning. When talent is powerful enough to make people look away, who pays the price for that silence? That question sits at the center of his downfall. His convictions in 2021 and 2022 turned years of allegations into legal consequences, ending the illusion that fame could protect him forever. R. Kelly's chapter fits this title because it shows the darkest side of celebrity power, how applause, money, and influence can surround a person while harm remains buried in plain sight. This is not a story of simple scandal. It is a warning about legacy accountability and the damage caused when an industry protects the star more than the vulnerable. His music once made him a giant in R&B, but his crimes reshaped how history remembers him. In the end, his story leaves behind a painful truth. Talent can build a throne, but character decides whether that throne survives. Bobby DeBarge. Bobby DeBarge first appeared as a voice that seemed to float above the tracklight, aching unmistakable. As the lead singer of Switch, he helped shape late 1970s soul with songs like There'll Never Be, where falsetto became both melody and confession. Behind that sound stood a young man from Detroit, raised in a household marked by strict control and instability, carrying early wounds into a career that moved quickly once the spotlight found him. Success opened doors but did not quiet the turbulence beneath. Bobby DeBarge later joined DeBarge alongside his siblings, where his influence helped guide their harmonies and identity during their rise in the early 1980s. Yet his path grew increasingly complicated. Struggles with substance use began to overshadow his musical gifts, and legal troubles followed. His 1988 conviction for drug trafficking led to a prison sentence, cutting him off from the very stage that had once given him purpose. When a voice that once defined a sound begins to fade, who is left to remember the man behind it? After his release, his health had already begun to decline. In 1995, Bobby DeBarge died at the age of 39 from complications related to AIDS, bringing a quiet and painful end to a life that had moved between brilliance and hardship. For listeners who remember the softness of his voice, the contrast remains striking how something so delicate could carry so much weight. His story stays close to the title because Bobby DeBarge represents the fragile edge of talent under pressure. He was not just a singer in a group. He was a foundation for a family sound that influenced R&B for years. His legacy lives in those recordings, in the echoes of falsetto that still surface across generations, and in the reminder that behind every smooth note there can be a life fighting battles the audience never fully sees. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway never needed volume to command a room. His power lived in restraint, in the way a single phrase could carry both warmth and ache. In the early 1970s, songs like A Song for You and his collaborations with Roberta Flack revealed an artist who could translate feeling into sound with rare precision. Audiences didn't just hear him, they leaned into him. That is what made his presence unforgettable. But beneath that quiet mastery, there was a struggle unfolding that would slowly reshape both his life and his music. As his career expanded, Hathaway began facing severe mental health challenges, later identified as paranoid schizophrenia. The condition brought episodes that disrupted recording sessions, strained relationships, and made touring increasingly difficult. At times, he believed people were trying to harm him, turning ordinary spaces into places of fear. By the late 1970s, these episodes became harder to contain, even as he attempted to continue working, including sessions tied to new projects with Flack. How do you hold on to creativity when your own mind begins to turn against you? That tension defined his final years, moments of brilliance interrupted by instability that neither talent nor determination could fully control. In January 1979, Hathaway died at the age of 33 after a fall from a hotel in New York, closing a life that had promised far more than time allowed. His story fits this title not because it centers on scandal, but because it reveals a quieter tragedy, one where an extraordinary gift existed alongside a condition that gradually limited his ability to live freely. What remains is a legacy carried in recordings that still feel immediate decades later. His voice endures gentle, precise, and deeply human, while his story reminds us how fragile even the most remarkable artistry can be when the battle is internal and unseen. James Brown. James Brown did not ease into greatness. He drove himself there with force, rhythm, and an unrelenting sense of control. Born in South Carolina and raised in poverty, he turned early hardship into a discipline that shaped every note, every step, every command he gave on stage. When he broke through with Please, 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 it was not just a hit, it was a signal. Something new had arrived, sharper and more physical. By the mid-1960s, records like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and I Got You, I Feel Good redefined popular music, laying the foundation for what would become funk. But James Brown's story never stayed confined to the stage. His performances were legendary precision footwork, sudden drops, the famous cape routine where exhaustion became part of the act. Yet the man behind the performance carried a life marked by intensity. He built an empire through touring, radio, and business ventures, becoming one of the first Black artists to gain significant control over his work. At the same time, his personal life drew scrutiny, including legal troubles and allegations of domestic violence, which he denied. When discipline turns into dominance, where does control begin to reshape the man himself? In later years, the spotlight softened, but never fully left him. His influence spread through generations of artists who sampled his beats, copied his movements, and studied his command of rhythm. When he died on Christmas Day in 2006 at the age of 73, it felt less like a quiet passing and more like the end of a constant motion that had driven music forward for decades. James Brown remains inseparable from the sound of funk, from the idea that rhythm could lead rather than follow. His life carries both triumph and tension, a performer who demanded perfection, a pioneer who changed the language of music, and a man whose legacy continues to move through every beat that refuses to stay still. Natalie Cole. Natalie Cole stepped into a spotlight already shaped by legacy, the daughter of Nat King Cole, yet determined to carve a sound that belonged entirely to her. In the mid-1970s, songs like This Will Be announced her arrival with energy and confidence, earning her Grammy recognition early in her career. She was vibrant, charismatic, and undeniably talented. But the weight of expectation being compared to a father whose voice defined an era never truly left her. It followed her into studios, onto stages, and into the quiet moments where identity becomes a question no applause can answer. As the years unfolded, that pressure found an outlet in struggles that began to surface publicly. Natalie later spoke candidly about her battle with substance dependence during the late 1970s and early 1980s, a period that disrupted her rising trajectory. Performances became inconsistent, opportunities slipped, and the voice that once felt unstoppable seemed at risk of being lost. Her recovery in the mid-1980s marked a turning point, but it came at a cost physically and emotionally. What does it take to rebuild when the world has already decided your story is over? That question sits at the center of her journey because what followed was not just a comeback, but a redefinition. In 1991, Unforgettable, with Love, reintroduced her to the world, including the groundbreaking virtual duet with her father that bridged generations and restored her place at the top. Yet even after that triumph, health challenges continued, including a diagnosis of hepatitis C and later kidney complications that required ongoing treatment. Natalie Cole's story fits this title through its contrast: brilliance, interrupted resilience, tested, and legacy reclaimed under pressure. She passed away in 2015, leaving behind more than music. She left a narrative of endurance, one that reminds us that even in the shadow of greatness, a voice can fall, rise again, and still carry something unmistakably its own. Ike Turner. Ike Turner stood near the origin point of rock and roll, a figure whose fingerprints are on the genre long before it had a name everyone agreed on. In 1951, his band recorded Rocket 88, often cited among the earliest rock and roll records, capturing a raw, distorted sound that felt different from anything on the radio. Raised in Mississippi and shaped by the Delta blues tradition, Turner carried rhythm like a tool, precise, driving, relentless, building bands, arranging sessions, and pushing musicians to play, tighter, louder, sharper. His partnership with Tina Turner brought both success and complexity into full view. As the Ike and Tina Turner Revue gained attention in the 1960s and early 1970s, their performances were explosive, tight choreography, powerful vocals, a stage energy that left audiences stunned. Yet behind that intensity, Tina Turner later described years of abuse in her autobiography accounts that reshaped how the public understood Ike Turner's legacy. He denied some characterizations and offered his own perspective in later interviews, but the shadow of those accusations became inseparable from his story. When innovation and harm exist side by side, how does history decide what remains at the center? After Tina Turner left the partnership in the mid-1970s, Ike Turner's career declined, marked by legal issues and struggles with substance use. Years later, he returned to music, releasing blues recordings that earned critical recognition, including a Grammy Award for Risin' with the Blues in 2007. That late resurgence suggested a musician still connected to his roots, even as his past continued to define public memory. Ike Turner's life does not settle into a single narrative. He was a pioneer whose early recordings helped shape modern music, a bandleader known for discipline and drive, and a man whose personal history sparked enduring controversy. His legacy moves between those truths, forcing each generation to confront the tension between influence and accountability, sound and story creation and consequence. Rick James. Rick James didn't just enter the music scene, he exploded into it with attitude, rhythm, and a refusal to play by anyone else's rules. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, hits like Super Freak turned him into a cultural force blending funk rock and rebellion into something unmistakably his own. He built an image that thrived on excess wild performances, bold fashion, and a persona that felt larger than life. At his peak, Rick James wasn't just making music, he was shaping an era. But that same intensity that fueled his rise would eventually begin to unravel everything around him. Behind the success, a different story was unfolding, one tied to addiction, volatility, and a lifestyle that refused limits. His struggles with substance abuse became increasingly visible, affecting both his behavior and his career. By the early 1990s, legal troubles brought everything into sharper focus, including serious charges that led to his conviction and imprisonment. The image of an untouchable star shifted into something far more fragile. What happens when the very energy that made you unstoppable becomes the force that pulls you down? That question defines the middle of his story, where fame no longer protected him and consequences began to reshape his life. After his release, Rick James attempted a return, appearing in interviews and performances that hinted at reflection, but the damage, both physical and reputational, was difficult to undo. Health issues continued to follow him, and by the time of his passing in 2004 at age 56, the contrast between his peak and his later years had become impossible to ignore. Rick James fits this title because his life shows how quickly brilliance can be overshadowed when control slips away. His music still pulses with energy decades later, but his story remains a reminder that even the most electrifying rise can carry a cost that fame alone cannot erase. Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown entered the spotlight as a teenager with New Edition, but his true identity emerged when he stepped out alone and rewrote the rules of R&B. With Don't Be Cruel, he fused street rhythm with pop precision, turning tracks like My Prerogative into statements of independence rather than simple hits. His stage presence felt restless, unpredictable, less polished than earlier acts, more immediate, more human. For audiences watching in the late 1980s, he represented a shift R&B that moved with swagger, not restraint. Success came quickly, but so did pressure. His marriage to Whitney Houston placed two powerful voices inside one public narrative where fame magnified both triumph and struggle. Headlines followed their relationship: intense love, creative peaks, and very public challenges involving substance use and legal issues. Brown faced arrests and periods of instability that often overshadowed his musical influence, turning him into a figure discussed as much for controversy as for talent. When a career begins with control and confidence, what happens when life begins to move faster than the man can steady it? The years that followed carried both loss and reflection. The deaths of Whitney Houston in 2012 and their daughter Bobby Christina in 2015 added a deeper layer of grief to a life already lived in public view. Yet Bobby Brown continued to perform, to speak, and to reclaim parts of his story, reminding audiences of the artist behind the headlines. His legacy remains tied to a specific moment in music history, the birth of a new R&B attitude that would influence generations after him. But it is also a story of survival under pressure, of a performer learning to stand again after being pulled into storms he could not fully control. Bobby Brown endures as both innovator and witness to the cost of living life under an unblinking spotlight. D'Angelo. D'Angelo arrived with the sound that felt like it had traveled through time before reaching the present. His debut, Brown Sugar, reintroduced a kind of groove that leaned into warmth, restraint, and musicianship, while Voodoo pushed even further layered rhythms, analog textures, and vocals that moved like conversation rather than performance. In an era turning toward polish and digital precision, D'Angelo chose imperfection, silence between notes, and a slower pulse that demanded listeners stay with him. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The video for Untitled How Does It Feel turned him into a visual symbol as much as a musical one, placing his body at the center of public attention in a way that complicated how his work was received. What began as artistic expression quickly became fixation, and the expectations surrounding his image began to outweigh the music itself. When the world starts watching the surface more than the substance, where does an artist find space to breathe? The years that followed were marked by absence. Struggles with substance use, legal issues, and the pressure of sudden hypervisibility pulled him away from the spotlight. For more than a decade, D'Angelo became a name spoken in memory rather than presence, an artist whose potential felt unfinished, whose silence carried as much meaning as his records once did. His return with Black Messiah in 2014 reframed his story. The album arrived without warning, raw and politically charged, reflecting both personal recovery and a nation in unrest. It was not a comeback built on nostalgia, but a continuation shaped by time, distance, and reflection. D'Angelo's legacy lives in that arc innovation, withdrawal, and re-emergence where music is not constant output but something that returns only when it has something urgent to say. Charlie Wilson. Charlie Wilson once stood at the center of celebration, his voice driving the sound of the Gap Band through hits that defined late 1970s and early 1980s funk. Songs like Outstanding turned him into a symbol of joy, rhythm, and movement. On stage, everything felt alive, crowds, energy, momentum. But when that era faded, the silence that followed carried a weight few outside his circle fully understood. The spotlight dimmed, the industry moved on, and Wilson found himself facing a different kind of stage one without applause. In the years that followed, his life drifted into instability. He has spoken openly about struggles with substance use that escalated after the height of his success, leading to a period where he experienced homelessness and uncertainty. The contrast was stark. A man who once filled arenas now searching for direction day by day. His eventual decision to seek help marked a turning point, but it was not immediate or easy. Recovery required time, structure, and support, including the steady presence of his wife, who helped guide him through one of the most difficult chapters of his life. When everything you built disappears, what gives you the strength to begin again? That question defines the middle of his story. What makes Charlie Wilson's journey stand out within this title is not only the fall, but the return. By the early 2000s, he re-emerged as a respected solo artist, collaborating with new generations and rebuilding a career that many believed was over. Later, his diagnosis with prostate cancer and successful treatment added another layer of resilience to his narrative. Wilson's life is shaped by contrast, peak success, deep loss, and deliberate recovery. His voice today carries more than melody. It carries history, survival, and the quiet understanding that some of the strongest comebacks are built far away from the spotlight. Etta James. Etta James did not sing as if she were chasing perfection. She sang as if she were telling the truth. From the moment At Last reached the airwaves in 1960, her voice carried a weight that felt lived in, textured by experience rather than polished for approval. She moved effortlessly between gospel, blues, jazz, and R&B, shaping a sound that refused to stay in one lane. Audiences didn't just hear Etta James, they felt her every note carrying both strength and vulnerability. That duality is what made her unforgettable, and it is also what makes her story fit so powerfully within this title. Behind the voice, however, her life was marked by battles that stretched across decades. Etta spoke openly about her struggles with substance dependence, a fight that disrupted her career and led to periods of instability during the 1970s. There were years when the stage felt distant, when the momentum she had built began to slow under the weight of personal challenges. Later in life, serious health conditions including leukemia, kidney disease, and complications from dementia began to reshape her final years. What does it take to keep your identity intact when both your body and your past are working against you? That question sits quietly at the center of her journey, where resilience becomes something more than a word. Etta James did not disappear in those years, she adapted. She continued to perform, to record, and to bring an emotional depth that only time could produce. Her later work carried a different kind of gravity, less about reaching heights, and more about holding on to something real. She passed away in 2012 at the age of 73, leaving behind a catalog that still resonates across generations. Her story is not defined by a single struggle or triumph, but by endurance. In that endurance, her voice remains raw, powerful, and honest, echoing long after the stage has gone quiet. Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse didn't arrive polished. She arrived unmistakable. When Back to Black released in 2006, her voice cut through the noise with a tone that felt both vintage and immediate, shaped by jazz, soul, and something deeply personal. Songs like Rehab turned confession into chorus, drawing global attention not just to her sound, but to the honesty behind it. She didn't perform distance. She performed closeness, letting listeners feel every crack and hesitation. That authenticity built her fame quickly and placed her under a spotlight that rarely softened. As that attention intensified, so did the pressure around her. Reports of substance struggles and turbulent relationships became frequent headlines, often overshadowing the music itself. Tours grew, inconsistent appearances became unpredictable, and moments on stage sometimes revealed a performer carrying more than the audience could see. What happens when the same vulnerability that makes you powerful becomes impossible to protect? That question sits at the center of her story, because the line between expression and exposure grew thinner with each passing year. Despite attempts to return to stability, including periods of recovery and renewed recording efforts, the weight of constant scrutiny never fully lifted. Amy Winehouse passed away in 2011 at the age of 27, closing a chapter that felt unfinished to many who followed her journey. Her story fits this title through its intensity: rapid rise, public struggle, and a legacy shaped as much by absence as by achievement. What remains is a catalog that continues to influence artists across genres and a voice that still feels immediate decades later. In that contrast between brilliance and fragility, her story endures not as a single narrative, but as a reminder of how closely talent and vulnerability can exist within the same life. These stories don't end in simple answers. They leave us with questions that linger long after the music fades. Were these legends undone by their choices or by the pressures that came with extraordinary fame? And how should we remember them, by their struggles or by what they gave the world? The truth may live somewhere in between. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Share your perspective below. And if you want more powerful, untold stories like this, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Black Excellence List.